So I love the analogy you just used, and I hope that we all keep this in mind too. If there's anything we're struggling with, the biggest way to solve this, as hard as it is initially, bring it to light, admit, and then Satan loses his power.
Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. Men's Alliance is a growing movement of tribes across the nation that meet weekly for rugged outdoor workouts and a real-world devotion around a fire. If you want to be a part of what we're doing, join us at men'salliancetribe.com, where you can find a tribe near you or come to one of our Start the Fire weekends. So check us out at men'salliancetribe.com. Now stay tuned for this great podcast. Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. I'm Dave Mills Goose. And back with us today for a second time on the Men's Alliance podcast, we've got Matt Osborne. Matt, welcome back to the podcast, buddy.
Bruce, it's fantastic to be back. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, so if you haven't listened to it, it's episode 169, and we were talking with Matt in that episode just a couple months ago about his organization that he's with, Operation Underground Railroad, and really how they're rescuing people out of sex trafficking, all sorts of human trafficking, but a lot of work specifically with kids who have been sex trafficked. And Matt, just catch us up, like give us like that, that trailer for those who missed the first one.
Absolutely. The Cliff's Notes version, right? Well,
that's right.
So I'm not cool, but I've been real blessed. The Lord's blessed me with some cool jobs. I was 12 years with the CIA and U.S. Department of State, worked issues related to terrorism against the homeland, organized crime, drug trafficking, and this thing I had never heard of back in 2006 called human trafficking. I thought it was prostitution, right? I didn't realize the role men had in perpetrating this. Worked that for a few more years, and I resigned from the government to join Operation Underground Railroad, as you just mentioned, OUR, Our Rescue. And we empower law enforcement in the U.S. and around the world to fight child exploitation and human trafficking. And I love when you talk about give us the trailer version, because if any of you saw the hit movie Sound of Freedom last summer, it's still on Amazon Prime. If you're interested in watching it, go on YouTube and watch the trailer. That's the founding story of our organization. So I led our undercover rescue operations, working with law enforcement, but now I'm in a position of global ambassador for operations and education, and doing what I think really God's put on my heart that I know we're going to talk about today, the role of men in perpetrating this issue. So therefore, how do we rally good men in the Men's Alliance and elsewhere to fight this, be Christ-like men, so that we're not out there, not we, right, but so that men aren't out there purchasing other human beings. So I'm just so grateful to be able to use this platform to discuss this topic.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, so if you guys haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that episode and get that full story that we went into. I listened to it again this morning, and I'm so glad I did. There's so much in there that I had even forgotten about, and some of the statistics that we discussed. So even if you did listen to it, go hear it one more time. So yeah, we want to get into, this is kind of like a part two, really. It was kind of like to be continued when we did this in March. And one of the things that I want to talk with you about is the stuff that's going on, current events right now. We are seeing so much in the pathway of grooming children. Now, obviously, this dovetails into the over-sexualization of society in general, men especially, but specifically children. This is an insidious thing that I feel like a lot of people, a lot of good people, a lot of Christians, they're not paying attention, and they're not seeing what's happening, and they're not seeing its implications. Talk to us about what's going on with grooming. How is this affecting this conversation and the over-sexualization of children?
Well, you definitely talked about the roots right now of everything. And think back to biblical times and some of the issues there. Some have said, oh, this is the world's oldest profession. But It's really not. This is morphed now into children. And it really is a slippery slope of how someone, let's say a man, might think, oh, I'm going to dial up a prostitute. I'm going to get online and get an escort. Now, she's in her 20s and 30s, so she must be choosing to do that job. Well, that's not the truth. Or even if she says, well, this is what I'm going to do, it's likely she's been led there because of a bunch of bad decisions that either have happened to her, that she's made, or other people have made for her. Then you combine that with the rampant addiction to pornography and online pornography. You talk about over sexualization, over objectification. Look at the COVID-19 lockdowns, 18 months to 2 years, when men mostly are at home with laptops and cell phones. Pornography is readily available. All of that works on the mind, where after a while, it's not enough of a dopamine hit, a rush to be with a 25-year-old or even a 20-year-old or even an 18-year-old. After a while, it's got to be younger. It's got to be more risque. And that's what we're seeing at Our Rescue. Our law enforcement partners around the world are seeing more and more of these so-called child sex tourists, Americans, Westerners, going overseas. And then in the United States, it's a huge problem as well. So as I look at the spectrum of this fight, and I've been fortunate to, work this from the intelligence side, law enforcement, working undercover, survivor care. Now this, if I could focus on just one topic, it's going to be what we're talking about today, the role of men in perpetrating the demand and the need for Christian men to lead this fight, to be men of Christ. We're not perfect. You've heard my story. I've heard your story. Everyone listening in, we're all sinners. But to catch ourselves, to realize that this is out there. And I'll stop talking here in a second, but it's not even just pornography. Look at what's in our media, our commercials, our billboards, our magazines. All of this stuff would have been considered pornography not too long ago, right? The scantily clad women, the objectification. And if men, we are not careful about letting that stuff get into our heads and our minds, that I fear is going to lead us down a path one day. Even if someone says, no way I'd ever do that, if you don't check yourself on all of these steps, one day you actually might think it's okay to go and buy another human being.
Yeah. I feel like what we're discussing here is the normalization of sin, really, but the normalization of over sexualization. It's becoming, I think the example of the frog in the boiling water is so perfect here. You throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it's hopping right out.
Yep.
It immediately knows this is not good. And so you don't do that. You put them in warm water, and then you slowly make it hotter, and they tolerate it. And then they're boiling before they know it. That's what I see going on with Christian men in this country. The water's boiling all around us, and we're not even recognizing it for what it is because it's happened so slowly and so gradually. And, it's easy to dismiss anything that happens one time or any one step along a journey or a path. You're like, well, it's just one step. It's just one little thing. It's just this one show or this one commercial or this one website. And, tolerating this and making it normal in our culture to see, girls younger and younger being sexualized, seeing pornography, constantly being bombarded with, like you said, stuff that would have been considered pornographic a few decades ago. It's just like mainstream now. That's prime time. That's not even pornography anymore because it's been normalized. We're desensitized to it. So what I feel like we've got to do for Christian men in this country is we got to wake up. We got to realize the water's boiling.
Right.
And we've got to do this reset. We've got to do this reset, and we've got to find out where that is. Where do we reset to? What do we get rid of? Where do we go back to? And what we've got to do is we got to destroy a lot of the idols of this world that are around us.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And, I know you have good women in your life. I have good women in mine. My wife of 26 years, my 22-year-old and 19-year-old daughters. I see the pressures they're under every single day. I see the struggles they have to try to be what society thinks they should be as a perfect wife or mother or girl. I see that on our side as well as men. And so, Goose, I'd appreciate your opinion too as we talk. How do you walk that fine line of warning men and Christian men about toxic masculinity, unhealthy masculinity, without going too far where we apologize for being men, where we listen to those in society, and I'm just going to say it, in our culture now, who want to emasculate men, who want to relegate us to nothing, just a bunch of buffoons on the sofa with a remote control in one hand and a beer in the other, right? How do we
Mm-hmm.
rise to be the husbands, fathers that we need to be without giving in to these lies that we're only a real man if we're the biggest, baddest athlete on the athletic field? We have the biggest houses, fastest cars, money, 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 and we have all, if we don't have all the chicks, right? And, I'm being facetious, but we don't have all the girls. Well, there's nothing wrong with being strong and working out, being physically fit, your workouts across this country. That's what you try to do. Nothing wrong with, working hard, making money so you can have some things you want in life, and nothing wrong with looking at what you want in a girlfriend, a spouse, a partner. But if we tie all of our masculinity into those three categories, we're never going to be enough. And that's what I think, unfortunately, men are being lied to by society. And when they feel disrespected, when they feel unappreciated, studies show then they're likely to go, well, how do I get respect? Well, I'm going to go control a woman. I'm going to go do this. And so I wonder your thoughts. How do we walk that fine line? Because I don't apologize for being a man. I know you don't either, but we have to recognize the role that men have, unfortunately, in some of these issues in our society.
Man, that's awesome. So first of all, I think the solution to toxic masculinity, which it exists, and it's a small percentage,
correct,
of men, but it does exist. The solution, or rather the antidote to toxic masculinity, is more masculinity. Because the part of masculinity that becomes toxic is the part that's not really masculine. It's the part that feels insecure and, like you said, goes overboard in some sort of a flex to try to make up for that lack of authentic, real masculinity. That's what we need more of in this country. We don't need men to be more beta and more feminine. We need men to be more masculine, because the more masculine a man is, the more steady, stable, secure, the more he's calming presence in the room. People feel safe around him. I was talking yesterday in a podcast with Chris Peranto, one of the warriors from Benghazi, and he was talking about this. He was like, all of the true warriors, the men who are unbelievably dangerous and masculine, they're always the calmest, and it's always the man who lacks true masculinity that wants to hurt others and control others. So all those things you listed, like money, house, car, women, those are all externals.
Yes.
Those are all external things that a man who's lacking the internal will turn to. And so what we've got to do is we've got to draw our masculine identity from a deep source inside of us. It's nothing external. You think about this. If it can be taken away from you, if it's an object, if you are finding your identity as a man in anything that is outside of yourself, be it a woman or a car or your job or your title,
right,
your home, that thing can be taken from you. And eventually it will be taken from you. That's how the story ends for all of us. When that thing is taken from you, your world will be rocked, because you will have lost that thing that you put your identity in. So part of this antidote to toxic masculinity is drawing our identity from a deep well, a source internal. And of course, we know that source is God himself, right?
Yes.
Finding your identity as a child of the King, as a child of the creator of this universe. That's where we draw our identity. And when that's our source of our masculine energy, it's so satisfying, because it's internal, and no one can ever take that. And it's the only thing that no one can ever take. And when you have that, when you reach that place, it's very calming, very secure, very peaceful, because you're no longer flexing, and you no longer have to prove anything to anyone around you with, a car or a woman or a job. And so I think that is the answer to what ails men in our society is they don't know where to draw their identity as men.
Right.
So they're looking to sex primarily, and we've always been taught like, oh, the day you have sex, the day you lose your virginity, that's the day you become a man. A boy became a man, right? And there's this confusion that somehow becoming a man has something to do with sex, which is entirely flawed. It has nothing to do with sex,
Exactly.
Anybody can have sex. That requires nothing,
Right.
Um,
Right.
But being a protector and a provider, that's something unique. That's something that requires a lot of a man for his whole life.
Yeah, and I think that as men, we're missing these type of relationships. And so again, I see on my wife's side, my daughter's side, they have their girlfriends and they'll go out to regular meetings and coffees and other get-togethers. I'm trying to reignite that with some of my high school friends, college friends. I don't know, Goose, your thoughts on that in terms of that we need to do a better job. Hey, call up a buddy. Hey, you want to get together for a beer? You want to get together to go hit golf balls? Go to the shooting range. That's what I love learning about your men's alliance is you get the workout, then you get the campfire, so to speak. We men need to find other people to come around the proverbial campfire with us. And there only has to be one other person, right? But it's these type of relationships because one time, and I wish I remember who said the quote, they said that man's life is a search for meaning. And if he doesn't have meaning, then he looks to find that in pleasures of the flesh and other things. And the more meaning we can have as men, I think is going to rally all of us then to not go, again, to quote the song, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah, I think, obviously you're hitting on one of the biggest themes of Men's Alliance, and that is getting men out of isolation and into a tribe, building that band of brothers. It really can't be overstated. Like that is the cure for a lot of problems in this world. You think about the man who, let's just take pornography, for example. When you're looking at pornography, you're by yourself. You're isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And you're indoors. So let's take that a little further. A guy who is looking for a prostitute, or then especially taking it another step, a guy who is looking for an underage, prostitute,
Right.
looking for a sexual encounter with a minor. This guy's by himself. Sin isolates us.
Mm-hmm.
Any addiction to alcohol is a common one. Most of us can kind of understand analogies with alcoholism, but it relates one for one almost to sexual addictions as well. They isolate us. They move us further away from friends, from family. They drive us to secrecy and lies. They drive us underground, and as we come out of that underground, as we come into the light, as we come into community, as we start talking with other men, it really begins to diminish and shrink that power that sin that has a hook in us has over us. It starts to decrease its power, especially when you speak it out loud.
Yeah.
When you sit around a campfire and you say out loud, I'm struggling with blank, and you say it, man, that is the first giant step towards finding healing and freedom from that thing.
Because then Satan loses his power, doesn't he? And I want to build on this point for people listening, and maybe there are men in this audience who are struggling with pornography. Maybe were casual in the past. Maybe they're wondering how to raise sons and grandsons. My advice is, again, to teach all of us and our sons and grandsons that the Lord Christ works in the light, Satan works in the darkness. So again, you mentioned you're alone, you're dark, you're hiding it. As embarrassing as you think it is, as hard as you think it is, talk about it. Tell men. That's why, again, I sometimes wish it wasn't so, but I talk about, yeah, I was casual with pornography in my teens and 20s, looking at back then it was just Playboy magazine, right? I mean, I didn't have one of these things around, a cell phone. Can you imagine now? That's the biggest danger, I think, for our children and our young men, are these just the rampant internet pornography. But the more you talk about it, bring it to light. And one thing you had talked about your first question at the outset of this episode about the grooming, and I wanted to make sure I shared. We had some meetings a few weeks ago with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and they're doing an amazing job fighting trafficking around the world. They talked about one of their biggest concerns right now is sextortion. So lots of young men, others, women too, but who are falling in the trap of, texting with a stranger, someone hits them up on their social media feeds, online gaming. And to the young man, we'll just use the example, he thinks he's talking to a 17-year-old girl or a 22-year-old girl, right? The profile pictures match. I mean, he has no idea. And then after a while, it's hey, here's a picture of me, and it looks like this beautiful girl. Why don't you send a picture of you? All right, here's my picture. Then after a while, hey, here's me in my lingerie. Why don't you send me a sexy picture? Well, at some point, if the guy takes a picture of his private parts, shows some, embarrassing picture and sends it, then all of a sudden it changes. And then the text message is, you're mine now. You're going to give me $500 or I'm going to send this to all your contacts. This is called sextortion. Well, the criminals here want the victim to keep it in the dark. But as embarrassing as it is, the minute you tell someone, whether it's law enforcement, a parent, a pastor, then you can actually take steps to bring it to light. So I love the analogy you just used, and I hope that we all keep this in mind too. If there's anything we're struggling with, the biggest way to solve this, as hard as it is initially, bring it to light, admit, and then Satan loses his power.
Absolutely, man. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's an important topic to discuss. And I actually read an article in the news just this past week about a young teenage guy who committed suicide. And he had been extorted like this, and he paid $500, and then they wanted another $500. And at some point, he did tell his family, and they did send the photos to everybody in his contacts because he stopped paying them. But it was like something he couldn't get over. He couldn't get past.
Right.
And he wound up taking his own life. And you think about this, what you said is exactly correct. The antidote is to put it out into the light. And when I think about Men's Alliance tribes and these weekly tribe gatherings, that light is like the fire. It's like, put it out around the fire. And man, it's going to be hard the first time you say it. The first time you say it's going to be gut-wrenching and painful. But it gets easier every single time. And that's the cure, because honestly, it's never as bad as you think it is. We have all messed up. We have all failed. You've got to, it's like you've got to run towards the problem. You've got to own it. Say, yep, I screwed up big time, and I sent these pictures and I regret it. But you know what? I'm not the first guy to do this, and I'm not the last guy, and I'm going to move on, and I'm not going to let this keep me on the sideline. I've put my past sins out there as well, because I don't want them to have that power over me. Right? I was a terrible husband, and messed up in every way that a husband can, and I feel like Satan has always wanted to keep me quiet and on the sideline. And that's certainly the easiest route. But like you said, we've got to just own it and put it out there. And while you were talking, I had to look this up. Full transparency, I didn't know the reference off the top of my head here. But John 3:20, I'll just share this. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. That's John 3:20. And I think that is the verse for this podcast. And that's really one of the verses for Men's Alliance. And what we're doing is that's the cure. You go into the light and you expose all the deeds, right? And I think of this, it's a lot like cleaning out a wound. Like, you've got this nasty infection. Yeah. And Satan wants you to keep that thing covered, keep it in the dark, don't let anybody see it. And really what you've got to do is you've got to take all the bandages and the dressings off of it, expose it to sunlight, give it some fresh air, and then that's where healing begins, both with, injuries on our body and injuries in our soul.
But then how do we get that message out that, again, you've got to rip that Band-Aid off. You've got to put it in the light. When you just talked about that tragic story of that young man who killed himself, there was someone not too far from me in North Texas, same thing. It may have been the same story, but unfortunately this happens all over the country because he thought that what he had done was so bad that there was no light or hope for him, that he thought the only out was to kill himself. And we're trying to tell parents and grandparents, tell your kids and grandkids the same thing I tell my daughters. I'm sure you tell your kids too. There's nothing you could do that could ever make me not love you anymore, support you. And there's nothing even beyond that that could even take you away from the love of Christ and the love of God. But this is what these criminals want. So I want to give a couple websites here, and then we can talk, maybe put them in the show notes, is cybertipline.org, cybertipline, one word.org. If your kids, you, anyone have images that are out there that you don't want out there, they can help you get them down. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and NetSmarts with a Z, netsmarts.org. They have resources for people at different ages of what happens and how to fight this sextortion, because this is so rampant now. And I get, and maybe some of the audience are getting, been getting so many more random text messages from, hey, is this so-and-so's number? They want to start conversations. I don't know if they're extortionists or not, but it just seems like we're getting all these random people contacting us. Be aware, they're out there, they're looking for money, and all it takes is one compromising photo, something that would embarrass a child, a youth, and they really are in their grasp. The minute you tell law enforcement, the minute you tell a parent, then that's when the healing starts. That's when the solution starts. And so I'm grateful that you're bringing up some of these topics as well, because I think it's vital to this rampant issue of sextortion in our society.
Yeah. So, guys, if you're affected by this stuff, check out these sites. We're putting them in the show notes. And also, just remember, it's not as bad as it seems. Put it in the light. Put it out there, around the fire. Tell your brothers about this. Even though it's going to be hard the first time to say it, that's where healing is, and freedom is found from it. Hey guys, is money holding you back from being used by God? If finances are a problem in your life and you're looking for some help, some counsel, some assistance financially, you've got to check out the Main Street Group. It's run by Tom Love, call sign Doc, with Tuckahoe Tribe. Okay, Doc is a certified financial planner. He's a fee-only fiduciary. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He uses Charles Schwab assets. He will help get you on course in ways that you didn't even know you were off course. He's not just a sponsor of the podcast, but my wife Carrie and I, we use him for our finances personally. He's helped us a ton. He's been ranked number 2 in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, number 1 in Style Weekly. He's a top 40, under 40 investor. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. He is the man to see to get you on course financially. God saved Tom spiritually and physically, and God is the reason for Tom's success, and he wants to help others succeed also. So whenever you go see Tom Love, a.k.a. Doc, don't forget to mention that you are a part of Men's Alliance, and he will donate your first year of fees back to Men's Alliance nonprofit 501c3. So he's not only helping you, but he's helping our ministry as well. So do yourself a favor, go see the Main Street Group with Tom Love. It's in the show notes. Check it out. And as always, Dave Ramsey and Charles Schwab are separate entities, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. Check him out, the Main Street Group, Tom Love. Matt, one of the things I want to talk a little bit about is I'm going to say new trend. It's probably not as new. It's probably been around longer than I realized, but it's new to me. The term that's being used, minor attracted. So minor attracted persons, yeah. Right? Yeah. So for those of you that, are new, hearing this for the first time, Matt, talk to us a little bit about this and kind of explain a little bit of what's going on here.
It's once again this blurring lines of gender, of sexuality, of healthy relationships between adults and children that are totally being blurred. We are being told now by some segments of society that you're not allowed to call them pedophiles, that's derogatory, that's pejorative, that's mean-spirited. You have to say minor attracted persons. That's something that's just their lifestyle, their choice. That's just what they're attracted to. And I just think this is so dangerous, because what's going to happen 10 years from now? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? People think, oh, Chicken Little, sky's falling. But Goose, can you imagine we're in the year 2024? If in 2014, someone would have talked about all the stuff that was going to go on in our culture, in our sports, who's men competing in women's sports and
Yeah.
all this, and minor attracted persons, and at schools now, if a kid says they're not a human anymore, they're a cat. And so now they're a furry, if you've heard of that. And they put litter boxes in restrooms. And right, I think people would have thought, put you in a straitjacket and put you in an insane asylum. There's no way in 2014 that'll happen in 10 years.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen in 2034? So
Holy
we all
smokes.
need to fight back against this. And again, I'm not here to judge anyone, what they choose, as long as it's not illegal. And having sex with children, abusing children, that is illegal. And anyone who thinks I'm being crazy, look it up online. I'm glad Goose just brought this up. MAP, minor attracted persons. And there is a lot of movement right now to normalize that. And that's something we as an organization, Our Rescue, I know you and others, we're just not going to stand for that, because the earlier and earlier these children are exposed to sex is going to be the worse for them, for their mental development, their physical development. I'm sure you followed news stories too about fights in school districts who are trying to keep books out of the hands of kindergartners that are teaching them to, pleasure themselves and all of these different things. Let children be children. They will learn these things in time. And I just shudder to think what our society is going to look back on in these years, right? 10 years from now, and say, what were you teaching people? What were you allowing to happen?
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to mention as well. Is the books in the school. So there was a college professor at ODU, Old Dominion, here in Virginia, that wrote this book, and the person, it was like a it was a female. She was a biological female, but she identified as a male, and she was a professor, and she wrote this book about really normalizing minor attracted persons. And also of relevance here is she was also calling for the dismantlement, the abolition of law enforcement and prisons. So she wanted there to be no prisons and no police, and destigmatizing minor attracted persons. And she got fired. She lost her job, which is a little bit surprising and kind of kind of refreshing. We're like, okay, good. At least that's not acceptable to say. But I'm sure it will be soon enough. But I see all this as one degree on that water getting a little warmer.
Oh yeah,
right? It's normalizing something. But I also want to say this other thing. So I see this whole minor attracted persons movement. I see two different things going on with it, and one of the things is bad and one of the things is good. So first of all, I'll say the bad one, right? And that's what I've already been saying. It's normalizing it. It's starting to make it mainstream. And what's the worst part about it is they're trying to hitch their movement to the LGBT movement, right? They're saying, see, we're just like y'all. Y'all are attracted to, males or females, or you're bi or you're trans. We're in that same community with you. We're just attracted to children. So we're with you guys. And of course, so they're trying to hitch their wagon to the LGBTQ movement. The LGBTQ movement is trying to hitch their wagon to the civil rights movement and be like, see, just like a few decades ago, there were laws that prevented a black person from marrying a white person. And thank God we got rid of those. And now one day we'll also get rid of the laws that prohibit, two men from getting married. And so they're trying to hitch on to the civil rights movement. Now, people who are pedophiles are trying to hitch on to that movement. So you see this logical train, or it's illogical really, but you see what they're doing. Their game plan is very clear. So that's the bad part, is there should be like a line in the sand, and you're like, no, this is absolutely wrong. We're not normalizing this. It's not okay, not ever. Okay, but here's the good part about this. So I want to say this for men listening. If you're listening to this and you're attracted sexually to kids, I want you to know that you're still a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
God still loves you. You are not irredeemable. You are not worse than everybody else. We definitely put this sin on a pedestal, and everybody. This is the one sin that everybody can agree on is terrible, right? And everybody wants to point their fingers at this one and be like, "Oh, you're evil, you're disgusting, you're terrible." But here's the thing: we all have desires that we should not act upon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one of the messages I want our listeners to hear. Listen, if you are attracted to the same sex, that means you are same sex attracted. That does not mean you are homosexual. Homosexuality refers to a lifestyle. It refers to actions, to what you do. You can be attracted to a person of the same sex, and you can resist that feeling and not act upon it, right? And so I think that we need to understand, especially as Christians, we all have sexual desires that we should not act upon. To act upon them is a sin. I have a desire to have sex with people that I should not act upon that desire because I'm married, and I should not have sex with anybody other than my wife. A man who is attracted to men, he's in the same boat as me. He's having a desire to have sex with people who he should not act upon that desire. Same thing going on here with kids. If you're attracted to kids, that does not mean that because you have that feeling, you have to act on that or you have license to act on that. So I think we need to kind of like understand that there's a divide between the feelings that we have, the desires that we have, and then there's the actions that we take, the things that we do. So when you're over here on that and you're talking about your feelings and your desires, that's one thing. It doesn't mean you have to cross that line and go over here to acting upon those things. So I know because I've talked to men who are attracted to kids, and I've counseled them, and I
So
talked
they've
to a
admitted
guy.
it to you. That's, I mean,
Yeah,
I guess good, right? They've admitted it to you, brought it to the light.
yeah, and this was
Yeah.
very
Wow.
educational for me. I talked with a guy. He was actually wearing an ankle monitor during our sessions. He had been arrested, obviously. He had done some time. He was out, and he was disgusted with himself.
Yeah.
Just like when we sin, when we do something that we know we shouldn't, we hate that about ourselves, right? And Paul writes about this. I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I do want to do. We all have that where we do something and then we're like, oh, I'm just sick. I'm just disgusted at myself for even doing that. So, and this goes back to the sexploitation thing. Like right when you do that, your only recourse is to tell somebody. So I've talked with guys who were attracted to kids, and they hated that about themselves, and they wished they could change that about themselves, just like Christian men with same-sex attraction do. They wish they were different. They hate that about themselves. They've tried to change. They want to change. I think it's important to understand that the same thing is going on with some of these men when it comes to, I don't know why, maybe, what happened. Maybe they were abused as children. Maybe, they had that happen to them and something in their
That's happening
brain.
a lot. Yeah. It's that early on, right? Abuse where you don't blame them for that. Unfortunately, their minds are warped in terms of
Yeah.
what's healthy sexuality. So then when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they're attracted to people the age of their abuse, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is. You're right. They hate it
Yeah.
about themselves. They don't want to do that. But whereas you don't blame them, as I said, for what happened to them, you have to make sure you're ready to pull them out of society if need be, protect the kids, because unfortunately they're preying
Absolutely.
then on the innocent.
Absolutely. So I think, guys listening to this, whether you're attracted to somebody of the same sex or somebody that's young, or somebody that's just not your wife, you've got to not act on that. You've got to fight that and realize, hey, all of us have feelings that we should not act upon. Acting on it, that's where you've crossed the line. That's a sin. And, for the protection of our kids, we've got to lock you up at that point.
And I don't remember if in the previous episode, you and I talked about this analogy when I go in and speak to church groups and others, and we talk about the Old Testament and King David. King David's sin wasn't seeing Bathsheba across the way or even thinking she was hot, right? Even thinking she was good looking, wanting to be with her. If it had stopped right there, no harm, no foul. He has no issues then later on in life, but he moved forward, he acted, he kept going. So with pornography, I'm telling young men, I tell myself, I tell others, just because you see pornography doesn't mean you're an addict. And you're going to see it because, again, whether it's a hot chick in a beer commercial or up on a billboard or whatever, or actual pornography. And if you see it and you like it, you're not a porn addict because we're made to be attracted, right? To that. That's how we procreate, keep the creation going. But it's acting on it. It's getting it in your head. And then it's following the slippery slope of unchecked pornography addiction, where after a while, it's not going to be enough to look at a magazine or watch a video of two adults having sex. It's going to have to be something with children or violent or a fetish. And then after a while, it's not enough to just consume pornography. You have to act on it. And that's what's leading these men who do purchase sex to go and try to buy it. Those that our rescue, when we help law enforcement make these arrests and do some of the post-arrest interviews, and almost every single one, the perpetrators, it's one of two things got them into it. One is what you just mentioned. I hate it about myself. I was abused by a stepfather or a babysitter or an older sibling when I was 4 or 5. Now that's the age I'm attracted to, right? Or it was pornography. I needed it. I needed to act on it. But when you all bring it down to the crux of the issue, it's what you and I have been talking about. It's men not having a healthy outlet for their stress, for their insecurities, for bad things that are happening. And that's what I love what you're doing with the Men's Alliance, is helping the physical, the mental, the spiritual. And I hope men listening here will know if you're struggling with anything, find those healthy outlets. For some, it's a workout. For some, it's going to go read the Bible and pray. For some, it's going out and having a drink, which is dangerous. So don't go too far down, would be my advice. That some is going out to have, friends, watching a game, doing whatever. Find your healthy outlet, divert your thoughts, because the quicker you can divert your thoughts and not let that evil get in you, I believe you're going to be better off and have a chance to avoid that behavior.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we've got to find healthy and legal outlets.
Yes.
Right. You got to find something that's healthy and legal to do. Working out is so great because it's healthy for so many ways, both physically and mentally. I love the saying, you can't control what birds fly over your head, but you can control which ones build a nest in your hair. Right. And so that's kind of like a lot of our thoughts, right? Sometimes we have a thought, we see something, and we have to consciously decide to not dwell on that, to not let that, build a nest in our brain and live there. We've got to let that thing fly by and dismiss it and keep moving forward. I think another important aspect of this is you've got to become aware enough to know that nothing is going to scratch that itch for you.
Yep.
Whether you're looking to heroin or sex or alcohol or pursuit of money and power, you will never be satisfied. You will never have enough. That thing that you're chasing, that thing you're pursuing, is always going to leave you at the end feeling empty. Right. And that's because we're all trying to fill a God-shaped hole within us that only God can fill. And if you're trying to fill it with sex or drugs or alcohol or money or power, it's never going to fill it. It's never going to be enough, and you're always going to need more. And like you said, it's addictions are progressive. There is an amazing video. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's this little cartoon, and we'll put the link to this in the show notes. There's this little cartoon on YouTube, and it's a bird. It's a little animated bird cartoon. It's the most powerful explanation of how addiction works that I've ever seen.
I haven't seen it, no.
Demonstrates, like, this bird finds this little golden nugget and it just makes it soar. And this bird just flies higher and more beautifully than ever. But then it comes back down, and then it takes like 2 of those pellets, and it only gets half as high the next time.
Yep. Okay, that's right.
And when it crashes a little bit harder, and every time that keeps happening to the point where it needs a lot of those pellets just to be able to get up and walk.
A little bit. Yeah.
It's not even ever going to fly now.
Wow.
But just to go to work, and I think, whether it's sex or anything else we've discussed, it's progressive. You're always going to need more of it. And we always think we're in control, right? This is how we always think we're smarter than our addiction. We think we're in control. I'm sure every guy or a lot of the men that have participated in sex trafficking have thought, I'll just do it this once, or just, this is the last time. I'll never do this again. Wow, that's a slippery lie.
Yeah. And they hate it. I spoke just this past week to, called the John School is sort of the colloquial term, but 17 men who had been arrested for online solicitation or in-person solicitation and then busted by a cop. And we talked to them about healthy masculinity. We talked to them about the laws. It's a crime in Texas. It's a felony in Texas to purchase sex. Back in the day, that John, the sex buyer, would get a slap on the wrist and the girl would get busted, even though she was being forced into it. Now it's a felony. So we're telling these guys, you think it's harmless that you're dialing up what you think is a prostitute or calling an escort. If you get arrested, all of a sudden you lose your rights, as a felon, right? The vote, the firearms, all the different things. So be very careful with that. Secondly, we asked these men, well, what led you? Again, with no judgment. It was a no judgment zone. I told them, there, but by the grace of God, go I, 3 decades ago, right? I mean, I'm no halo over this head. But everyone was talking about, again, this idea of, I had other struggles in my life. I was feeling mental health. I was feeling disrespected, and I didn't have an outlet. That was the only outlet, I thought. And then secondly, they were under a misperception of, hey, it's an even trade. I want her body. She wants my money. That's how she chose to work as a prostitute or escort, not realizing the exploitation, the drug addiction, the force, the extortion, the fraud, the coercion that she had been under that led her to that. And we said, once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see, you can't unsee. And I'm hoping all the men in your audience will commit now that we're going to be men with more, to go out there and rally the good men in our lives. And again, not that anyone here in your audience would ever purchase sex, but do we go to bachelor parties? Do we go to strip clubs? Do we look at pornography? Do we objectify women by calling them the B word or worse? Do we tell sexist jokes? Do we laugh when other guys tell sexist jokes? And Goose, you know who the first person is who knows all the stuff he said and did? It was this guy, me. And so I'm saying, do as I say, not as I did. I can't change the past. None of us can. But we can affect the future and affect the present and change the future. And that's what I know we will now do in your audience here.
Man, that's so good, Matt. I love it. And I think the steps to healing are not complicated.
Right.
It's a deep, dark web of sin that men are entangled in, but the way out of it is so simple. It's not a complicated way out of the sin. Like I said, you're in this sin because you are trying to fill a void in your life, right? Like you said, every addiction, it starts off as the solution to a problem. The guy's feeling empty or lonely or depressed or angry, and he wants to stop feeling that, and he wants to feel better, so he turns to a thing to make himself feel better, whether he's turning to drugs or alcohol or sex. He's looking to that thing to be the solution to his problem. And eventually that thing will become a bigger problem than the original problem. So the key is to understand, like, what's making me want to go get this in the first place? Why am I feeling empty or lonely or depressed or angry? And figure out the root cause and go after that. So for men, you've got to understand, I would say, really, I give you 2 steps out of this problem, out of this sin that has maybe entangled you. say one is you've got to understand that God is the only thing that's ever going to fill that void within you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you turn there, as soon as you turn to Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that's when healing can begin. And it's going to be a long road. You're not just like magically, 100%. It's a long road of sanctification, but that's when it starts, and it can't ever start before that, because until that happens, you will always be trying to fill that God-shaped hole with something else. So one is you turn to God first, and then two is you build that band of brothers in your life. You come out of isolation, you get around the fire, you share your struggles, you open up, you're real, and then that's when the chains, start to lose their grip on you. So I would recommend those two steps for men. If you're listening to this and you're like, man, I'm struggling, I'm attracted to something or someone that I should not be, and I need help. Well, first of all, give it to God. And second of all, open up and share it with like-minded Christian men who have struggles as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to remember is how do you, remember we talked a little while ago about how do you walk that fine line between avoiding toxic masculinity, having healthy Christ-like masculinity. How do we be the men we need to be, more masculine, as you mentioned? That's actually counterintuitive to what society's telling us. And you
Right.
quoted John 3:20, which I love. The scripture I love is 1 Timothy 6:11, which, full disclosure, I don't have memorized. So I have here, but thou, O man of God, flee these things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
talking about pornography, fornication, all that, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. So how interesting is this? You are a stronger, more masculine man when you're meek, when you're patient, when you show faith, when you show love. And I use Christ as an example. We can never reach him in this life, maybe someday down the line, but emulate him. He was the strongest man ever, and yet he was the most humble, wasn't he? So let's try to find that strength through humility, patience, meekness, faith, but while at the same time never apologizing for being a man and trying to be the good men that our society needs, to raise the bar to the women in our lives, be the husbands, the followers, husbands, fathers, and followers of Christ we need to be.
Man, that's it. That's the capstone right there. And I'll say this about meekness. Meekness is strength under control.
Right.
So you literally cannot be meek unless you are strong.
Love it.
If you're not strong, you're just weak. You're not meek, you're weak, right? So you have to have strength in order to be good when you think about this, right? Because you can't be good unless you have the power to be bad. Otherwise, you're not. Being good is a moral choice, and if you have no moral choice, then it's not goodness; it's just weakness. So, as men, we need that strength in order to be the protectors, in order to be the providers, and in order to be, like you said, to be meek, to have that strength under that control. Matt, this has been an awesome conversation with you. As we wrap this up, what are your closing comments that you just want men to walk away from here if they take one sentence or one nugget from you?
Just how grateful I am for all of the men listening who are like me, fallen so short, yet each day try to be the best we can. Don't give up, men. When we fall by the wayside, as we all have, do, and will, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, pray, repent, look to the strength, as Goose was saying, it's above. Every day give thanks that we are men, but know that to whom much is given, much is to whom much is given, much is expected. And we need to raise that bar, and we can do this. So I will leave it at that. Have confidence, be strong, and be meek, the way Goose just said. I love it.
Yeah, that's good. And guys, this is why in our creed we have my past failures will not define me. When the world knocks me down, I will get back up every time, because we know we've all got past failures, and we know the world is going to knock us down. And just like, I have past failures, Matt has past failures. We're still going to finish strong because we're not going to stay down. We're going to keep getting back up. So guys, internalize that message, make that a part of who you are. Remember, we all have desires and feelings that we ought not act upon. Everyone is redeemable. Everyone has an opportunity to finish strong no matter what you've done. So, guys, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your stories. Send us an email to info@men'salliancetribe.com if you want to share your story. We would love to hear it. Or leave us comments on our YouTube video. Your thoughts, your comments about this topic. We'd love to hear from you there on our YouTube channel. And lastly, please support Operation Underground Railroad. We'll put their website in our link again. They're out there on the front lines combating the sex trafficking that's going on in our world today. With over 40 million slaves, there's more slaves today than there ever have been in world history. So this is a huge problem, and Matt and his organization are working on this. So Matt, thanks again, buddy. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, Goose. Appreciate you as well.
So that was another incredible conversation with Matt Osborne from Operation Underground Railroad. And guys, I've got a huge announcement to make. Listen, next week on Saturday, June 22nd at Hope Church in Richmond, we're having our first ever family cookout and barbarian games. That's going to go from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Bring the family. June 22nd from 9 to 1. Bring the family to Hope Church in Richmond. We've got climbing walls, bounce houses. We've got a huge inflatable obstacle course just for kids, and there will be prizes for the kids as well. So there's some competition for them. And then at 10 a.m. on the 22nd will be the competitive first inaugural Barbarian Games, where you are going to be challenged physically and spiritually. And it's teams of 2 competing to represent your tribe and win an incredible award. It's a major award. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you're going to want it. And this is our first time doing it. It's our way to say thank you to the families, as well as do just a little bit of fundraising to continue fueling this ministry. So guys, sign up for the Barbarian Games. Bring your whole family. Free lunch, hot dogs, hamburgers. Check it out on our website, men'salliancetribe.com, for all the details. I don't expect you to have just written down everything I said. It's on the website. Guys, God's doing amazing things in and through Men's Alliance, and we are excited to continue to grow together. So like us, subscribe us, share this podcast. Come to Barbarian Games June 22nd. Bring the whole family. I'll see you guys around the fire. Thanks for listening to the Men's Alliance podcast. We hope to see you in one of our tribes or at one of our unforgettable weekend experiences. So join us at men'salliancetribe.com.